outrage sparked around the world. A black man killed under the knee of a white police officer. People from every continent, religion, and race are coming together.
I'm out here because it doesn't matter what color you are, it matters who you are.
Let's go!
Some are demanding change. Others want answers.
Many people have asked me that, what's up with the All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter? Nobody said, only Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter more than white lives. We're saying, when black lives are taken unjustly and nothing's being done about it, it sends the sentiment that black lives don't matter.
Some don't know where to start. Join an ISBA Conversation. Real change begins with you.
Hey, Azra.
Assalamu alaikum. Salam, shalom. Hey, David. Hey, John. I'm Azra Hussain. I'm the co-founder and president of the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Arizona. I'd like to introduce you to my co-host this evening. Rabbi John Linder is the senior rabbi at Temple Solel in Paradise Valley, and Pastor David Felten is the pastor over at the Fountains United Methodist Church. Good evening, both of you.
Good evening, Azra. Yeah, Azra, always so grateful for your leadership of the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Arizona, an organization that is such a model of bringing the community together as we'll do tonight. And Pastor David Felten, always a joy as well, on here with a sister and a brother. And I have the honor of introducing Dr. Cliff Moon. And it's a truncated bio of Dr. Moon, but blessed to be able to give it. Dr. Cliff Moon has a strong belief in individual and collective worth and is passionate about social justice. Over the years, Cliff has been engaged in the community through participation in the East Valley Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee, chair of the City of Mesa's Human Relations Advisory Board, the City of Mesa Police Department's African American Forum, and the Symposium on Poverty and Homelessness. Presently, Cliff is the coordinator of diversity and inclusion in the Tempe Union High School District.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here.
Great, and I get the opportunity to introduce our next speaker. Stepping in at the last minute for Lydia Guzman, who had a last minute conflict. So great to have you with us, Carlos. Carlos Galindo Elvira is a longtime civil rights, community, and nonprofit leader, having served in both Metro Phoenix and in rural Arizona in a variety of roles, including regional director of the Anti-Defamation League's Arizona Regional Office and mayor of the mighty town of Hayden, Arizona. He currently serves as the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships with Chicanos por la Causa. It's really great to have you with us tonight, Carlos. Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor.
I'm so honored to be here, and thank you for that nice tourism commercial for Hayden, Arizona. It is a mighty little town, I will tell you. And I'm so thrilled to be speaking here with two of my favorite people, Azra and Rabbi Linder.
Great. Well, speaking of Azra.
Hi, I get to introduce Qaed. Qaed Mai is a father of 3 young children and works as a design strategist at ASU. Qaed is a Muslim Chinese American immigrant, and he has been deeply involved in his communities for most of his life, although he has taken some time off and refocus on his 3 young children. Welcome, Qaed. It is an honor to have you back again this evening, and I look forward to spending time with all of you. David?
Thanks, Azra. Well, this is a follow-on to a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, and we wanted to be a little more specific in what we talked about tonight and focus specifically on the idea of justice. And I don't think I'm telling any of you anything new
if I say that Americans are confused. The word justice is often used as a euphemism for revenge. You hear it on the news all the time when someone is discussing the death of a loved one or something. They say phrases like, "We want justice," which they should be saying revenge. And so it gets confusing to most people when they hear a phrase like "no justice, no peace." That that sounds threatening to a lot of people because they have in their mind no revenge, no peace. So that's one of the things that I find a struggle in trying to help people get up to speed on what justice is, either individual justice or systemic justice. So we're going to have our speakers speak to that in a moment, but first I want to ask Azra and John if they would like to say a word about their experience of justice and what it means.
Azra, please.
Oh, thank you. Well, I always go back to what justice means to me as a Muslim and how I was taught it. My great grandfather had a monogram, and on that he had a little saying on there, and it basically just said, "Be just and fear not." And so our whole family grew up with this "Be just and fear not." And only as an adult or semi-adult in my teen years, I found out that was actually a quote from Shakespeare's Henry VIII, "Be just and fear not." And as a Muslim, I'm taught that justice means two things, actually. It means placing things in their rightful place and also affording equal treatment to others. So placing things in their rightful position and giving everyone their rightful due. So to me, when I use that as my base for defining justice in any of my actions, any of my words, those are the two things that I'm hoping to achieve from my actions and words.
It's beautiful, Azra. I love that. And I think of as a Jew, and actually it connects all of our faith traditions tonight. Abraham being the father of the patriarch of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Abraham as the model who's toe to toe with God says, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat." When Abraham sees an injustice of God about to eliminate the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, says, "Should not the judge of all the earth do justly?" So that to me as a Jew, and it'll be great to hear a reflection from our panelists tonight, justice means having the boldness of speaking truth to power, and how collectively as a community we can do that where there is an injustice, to have the courage and the backbone and the collective organization of people in the community and our civic responsibility to speak that truth to power. So that's my contribution. Dave, take it again from there.
Well, and I just wanted to say, from a Christian perspective, obviously I need to defer to my Jewish roots and say that I think one of the theme verses for my life and for many Christians that I know of, I would suspect that Jesus was very familiar with Micah 6:8, where it's said that what is expected of us, but to act with justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Those are really important for me as a follower of Jesus, and it's one of the main focus of being a disciple. So with that in mind, from a Muslim, Jewish, and Christian/Jewish perspective, let's turn to our guests tonight and see if we could get them to reflect on the question, how would you define justice in order to make it clear to people who might be confused about the meaning? What would be your elevator speech that would introduce people to the way you understand justice. So, Carlos, do you want to give a start?
What a great question to start with. And I have the benefit of talking about it culturally from a Latino standpoint, that growing up, there's this quote by Benito Juarez that says, El respeto es la paz. And that means respect is peace. And that's what my sense of justice is, that there's respect in the process that can lead to peace. And we're not seeing a lot of that play out in a lot of what we've seen these last couple of weeks. But the Jewish side of me, the social justice side of me, says that it can happen and that we can all be helpers in that process so that we can get from respect to peace.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you.
So, Cliff,
Cliff?
Yeah, three thoughts came to mind when that question was posed to us. The first thought that I had was that justice embraces the notion that all individuals, regardless of their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their race, or whatever it may be, are entitled to what we would call human rights. And that would be a right to life, liberty, work, education, healthcare, even the right to be able to speak their language without any repercussions. The second thought that came to me was that justice is about our institutions that oversee our public lives, have a responsibility of providing policies and guidelines and tools and resources equally and also equitably so that people can realize their full potential. And then the third thought that came to me about justice is about us. It's about us having an interest and taking on the responsibility to try to perfect our organizations, our institutions, where we work, our lives, to ensure that people are able to have access to the rights that belong to them.
Thank you, Cliff. That was wonderful. Qaed, I I apologize. I never gave you a chance to even say hello earlier. So go ahead and say hi, and then please, go ahead and tell us what you would wish to talk about justice.
Yeah, thanks again for having me here. It's a great honor to be with everyone here. It's great to meet and be in a company of a real life mayor. So I'm excited. I think that to address this confusion or the sense of being threatened by an idea of justice maybe being conflated with revenge does to me suggest that we're worried that something bad might happen if this justice is found. I mean, injustice almost by definition usually stems from a differential of power, and trying to seek justice is to righten that sort of situation. I think one of the greatest confusions that we have, despite centuries of fighting racial problems, is that we tend not to see racism as a systemic issue, but as somehow an individual sin, right? And so we're always quick to start our sentences with like, oh, I'm not racist and I would never be, I don't have a racist cell in my body or that sort of thing. But, I would think that it's a timely comparison to look at the pandemic and a disease and make that comparison that racism is very much entrenched in the institutions around us and our environment. And therefore, all of us carry that sort of disease with us. And so to walk around saying, oh, well, no, I'm not racist, but that person is sort of silly in the same way that if you walked into a village full of sick people, someone coughing and telling you, oh, no, I'm not sick, but I am coughing. And it's sort of a weird sight to see, but in the same sense, if we are able to look at it from that direction, from a systemic viewpoint, then we can realize that seeking that justice is very much a big foundational work that we have to do, and it's not merely I think that sense of being threatened or that sense of personal shame only serves to obfuscate and sort of discombobulate the discourse.
Well, you've mentioned a little bit about the difference between individual justice and systemic injustice. And maybe each one of you could say a little bit about how you understand the difference, because I think that's one of the things that is really threatening to a lot of people, is they don't understand. They can't conceive of the fact that the way we choose to organize ourselves as a society says something about our values as a society. And maybe you could each say a word about that, and maybe we can go in backwards order from Ed to Cliff to Carlos.
Sure. I guess I'll just jump back to that this analogy of a village again. And if you were to walk into this village and everyone were having the same symptoms, it would be silly to say, oh, everyone just coincidentally had the same symptoms of fever and rash and coughing, and they're all making this choice to be sick. Is this really odd way to see it? But if you were to be a little smarter about it, you would obviously see that there is some common symptom, something in the water, something in the air, something about the way the society, the village is structured that creates this disease, right? Obviously being a metaphor for racism here. We know that in old medieval towns, people would throw their waste into the streets. And so you need to look at some deep structural changes in order to change the way that we're all affected by a disease of racism in this case. So not only are we having to seek fundamental changes socially, whether that's through government and law, but also we have to practice our own individual changes as far as the analogy for washing our hands or just taking baths and things like that. I think in that sense, sorry to sort of have derailed that conversation a bit away from the differences between individual and social justice, but I think that being able to separate those two things, well, I wouldn't separate them so much as say that they're very deeply entrenched with each other, but I think that to see this as a systemic issue helps us really unload the burden of feeling like that instinct of feeling like you have to apologize or be sorry, but really just to pull up your sleeves and get working.
Thank you. That's actually wonderful. Thank you. There's a lot of gems we can pick out of that. Thank you, Qaed. Just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have questions, please make sure to go ahead and put them in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you, comments or questions, either way. Thank you. Cliff?
Yeah, I think what's happening right now, especially around the confusion of justice, is that we have many individuals that are not able to understand what it is that they're seeing. For many individuals, when we talk about justice, we have conversations about peace. They come up with words such as fairness, integrity, honesty, righteousness, impartiality, uprightness. And so when they have this paradigm, when they think of that, they don't see the disruption. In other words, peace is silence. And so when they're seeing folks out in the streets and they're demanding justice, that does not fit in with their paradigm of what justice and peace looks like. And so that's where I think the confusion takes place. The other piece, I think, where people are confused is that they think of the issue singularity. In other words, what is the issue that people are going to the streets and demanding? And the major issue, if we look at the media, is they're talking about the policing. And I can understand that, I can get that, from Mr. Floyd's death. But we have to broaden our horizon and understand exactly what is it that people are demanding. What is it? What type of justice are they looking for? And if we do our research, and if we have what I call those courageous and comforting conversations, what we find out is folks are protesting for justice from environmental racism, poverty and homelessness, inadequate health care, disability issues, immigration, refugee issues, LGBTQ rights, housing, criminal justice, gun violence, gender inequality, domestic abuse, education system, voting rights, economic racism, drug use. And so if we're able to broaden our horizon and shift our paradigm to understand just what exactly are people out there protesting about, that is not just about policing. Okay, I get that. So those other issues that people are wanting to have conversations about and are demanding their rights beyond policing, then we're able to understand that justice is not just about peaceful order, but it's also about bringing attention. It's about people being able to rightly demand those human rights that we're all entitled to. And so, once again, I think that's where the confusion comes from, thinking only in singularity issues, and then also the paradigm of thinking that peace and justice is always about order.
Thank you, Cliff. Carlos.
Well, yeah, before I say anything, I have to correct something because I could hear my grandmother's voice as soon as I stopped talking. That the quote is "El respeto al ajeno es la paz," which means the respect for the other is peace, which lends itself beautifully to what we're talking about at this moment. Because if we see about disproportionate impact of COVID, let's just take a look at what's called the essential worker. The individuals, the farm workers, and the individuals who are doing the jobs where they don't have sick leave or pay time off, and you see disproportionate amount coming down with COVID. And you also see that impact within the African American community. And these are systems that are set up that are harmful to people of modest means and people who happen to be of color. And that is, you see that happening now, and you see the outcry, but in many cases you don't see the response to it. And that's cause for concern because they're people, they're humans, they're the other that's perceived by others, and where is their peace?
That is true. That is true. Thank you. We seem to have some questions coming in, but I think David, you had something that you wanted to say before we went to the questions. Is that correct?
Nope, I just thought we would go to one of the first questions there.
Sounds good. Can you guys see the questions when they come up?
Let's put that up on the screen, Joe.
Are there allies now in the state legislature who are on board for criminal justice reforms such as sentencing reform? This is an election year, so it's important to know who is or is ready or is not ready to be a positive force. Anyone wish to chime in on that or speak to that? Yes, no, maybe?
What I can say about that is if the legislature comes back in session, it's going to be to deal with COVID-related matters. So the question of sentencing reform or judicial reform won't be a topic that will be voted upon, and it will be something that will have to wait until January of 2021 when the legislature reconvenes, and it'll be a new legislature depending on what happens with the elections in November.
Makes sense.
So Joe, there was another question that you had up on the screen. Maybe you could pull that up too.
That was it.
That was it. Okay.
Okay, good.
So, Dave, I may, if I could, love all the reflections, just to push this a little bit. There are three words in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, pursue justice, or justice, you shall pursue. So interesting to have a definition of justice, and actually the question just asked by Judy Schaffer with a specific question of criminal justice reform. What does it look like for us to pursue this? And I would just toss that out to any of you to move from the theoretical definition of how do we then pursue it?
Well, if I can respond to that, I'm reading a book by Stacey Abrams, and if you're aware of Stacey Abrams or know anything about her, she was running for the governor position in Georgia. And as I understand, the person who was overseeing the voting system, who is now the governor, was suppressing the vote. And Stacy says in her book, Our Time Is Now, is that we are positioned right now with our demographic change in terms of race and ethnicity, and also with our younger voters being much more progressive. But what she also says is that we have to be diligent and understand that in order for us to make change, concrete change, with criminal justice reform, with housing, with education, and Carlos, as you said, workers' rights, we have to vote in individuals who don't just talk the game, but actually walk the game. And so we have to educate ourselves and we have to challenge the status quo. And nothing is more powerful than demanding our right to vote. So I would say that we have to make inroads to change the system. You know, my father always said to me, he said, you know, son, you can stand on the outside and yell and scream and be mad and throw rocks and call people names. He said, but unless you work within the system, you're not going to be able to affect change. So we have to get individuals in there who understand that we have to be much more progressive and move away from this conservative landscape that we're living in right now.
Can I add something to that? One of the things that Rabbi Linder, I'm so grateful to you for bringing up that what you just talked about, justice, justice you shall pursue, because it's the pursue that many people have questions on when they see protesters out on the streets and think that that's the only way that you can advocate. And I always tell people there are many ways to be advocates, whether it's you're on your phone calling members of the legislature, you're writing letters to the editor, or you're making a contribution to a nonprofit of your cause. We can all be pursuing justice in different ways. There is no one way. And I always say, if you have a mobile phone, you have the tool for justice, because you can call, you can make requests, and you can make contributions.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is exactly what I want to remind all of our guests and our hosts tonight is the whole point of this conversation tonight is to give our audience tools and tips on how they can be the change. They can be the, the one baby step for that change. They can be the seed that starts, a great plant and great forests, but we need to be able to give them those tips this evening. With that, there is a comment that's come in. It's she said, or he said, I'm not sure who wrote this. I fought this fight in the 1960s in Omaha, Nebraska. Why are we still fighting now? I'm so disheartened. What will create real change? Anyone? Qaed, you want to try that, or anyone else?
That's a heavy one. I don't have much to add to it, but what I would want to say in terms of historical progress, every time this fight comes up, I think some sort of progress is made. And whether or not that progress is extensive or not doesn't mean that the cause is lost so much as at that moment we've been temporarily halted, defeated, or slowed down. But I think we can see that over time progress continues to be made. And that's something to be heartened about, right? I can't speak for having actually been in that many fights since I'm just 30 years old at this point. But I think that, this is something that we all know we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives. And so that is discouraging, but also I think very sobering, but heartening as well at the same time. As far as advocating for real change, I think, again, it's if we really want to see, in quotes, what real change is, and I think that's hard to define, I think it has to revolve around engaging with some very crucial aspects of the very fundamental building stones of what our society has been built off of, and that is to confront really this legacy of colonialism and racism that came from it, and really to seek the social institutional justice there. I know those are all very vague words, and we can get to more actionable items soon. But I just want to say that as far as real change is concerned, I think that's something that we have to really address. And up until this point, especially the way we learned in grade school how racism is dealt with, is like, oh, some bad people did something bad, and then Dr. King marched and everything was okay. And we have to stop looking at it as a case-by-case basis and really try to be more introspective about the soul of what we are as Americans.
Thank you. Thank you. Cliff, Rabbi, David, anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add it. It sounds like a very simplistic response to a very complex question that was asked. And I will be honest with you, I get tired. I get angry, I get frustrated, I'm exhausted, especially when it seems like you continue to fight for justice, for the rights of individuals. But you know what, I also am aware that we have to understand that we're not going to fight the big battle. The way that wars are ended are by the little battles, one by one. And so, as a professor said to me, when you get frustrated, remember that you can plant seeds of change. You may not be around to see the fruition, but if you give up, if you allow your emotions to overtake you and to feel defeated, then you will be defeated. This issue of supremacy has been a part of the United States from its founding. And so we can't think that we're going to end that supremacy overnight. So once again, I would encourage the person who posed that question to continue the courageous fight, plant seeds, and have hope that change will come.
I think I would want to add as well that
yeah.
I would just want to add as well that one of the things, with the exception of Qaed, I think that the rest of us are, in the autumn of our lives. And one of the things that I want to respond to Sharon and her question is, what can we do to promote real change, is to find some young people who are working for change and do everything we possibly can to support them in what they're doing. I know Sharon, and I know that that is one of the things that she does already. So I would want to encourage her to continue doing that. And I think that we can get discouraged if we think that, hey, it's not going to change in our lifetimes. We haven't seen enough change to think that maybe we've registered change. But find some young people who are doing things that are in the right direction. And guess what? They're going to do it completely differently than we would do it. And that's okay. Just find out from them what they're trying to do, ask what we can do to help, and get out of the way.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's wonderful. Another comment / question. There is a midrash that Job was chosen for his experience because although his conduct was righteous, he did not speak out when he saw injustice. Is the silent majority automatically unjust?
Altogether? Yes.
Yes. Anyone want to add to that? Or should
Before
we
I say anything, I would like to point out that I'm in early autumn. And that makes a difference. There is this feeling, without question, without a doubt, that where are the voices? Where are the people to speak out against the injustices that we see, the horrific rhetoric that we hear? And is silence acquiescence? Are you giving permission for this behavior, for this conduct, for this lack of decency? And I would say yes. And standing up doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a huge, moment. It can be something as small as signing a petition for change. And it can be something as big as voting, because that is the most important expression of democracy, is the vote. But we need to do that, and we need others to join us. And in every generation, there's this need to break through on something. That is our breakthrough in this generation, is to get the silent to finally speak up, whether it's by voting or by standing up with those who are being oppressed and being marginalized.
And actually, I would only add to that saying an action for an individual like me, I don't have to go stand up with 200 people. Even if I just stand up with or for my one neighbor next door who's being oppressed, I'm doing my part. So all I want to do is let our audience know that every single action and word counts. It all goes towards the ultimate goal of making it better. So, please don't look at just saying, oh, such and such made a difference for 300,000 people. If you made a difference for one human being, you did a lot. So please, make sure that, don't just look for the big events. Look for every event. Question. How do we convince the people who think they have something to lose from the advent of equality that the pie is not finite, but expandable? Anyone?
I can just maybe expand on that a little bit in an anecdote. And I know this never happens to you, John, but sometimes I have people who walk out of my sermons upset about something that I've said. And I look back to years ago when someone stormed out of a sermon that I was talking about systemic injustice and how we needed to rethink some of the things we were doing in order to make our system more fair. And he happened to be a contractor who had evidently just come up against part of the government expectation that they would consider bids from minority-owned companies and put a priority on that to give a chance to put more people into the mix of government contracts. And he could not ream me out enough for saying how unfair that was. And he was genuinely threatened by that because he had this idea that the pie is finite and couldn't see that there's a possibility of expanding what we're doing. And that's really the challenge that I think we have and that I've experienced, is convincing people that there is an abundance of opportunity to include everyone, and that everyone is better off the more people we include, the more perspectives we include, than trying to limit it in order to just favor a few.
I'm gonna bring that down to an 8th grade level here, and just say it like this: when my kids were growing up, the older three, there's a big gap between the older three, and my youngest, there's like a 5-year gap between the third and the fourth. And so when I would give concessions to the youngest one, where they got to bed by 9:30, but he was allowed to go to bed 10:30 at a younger age, they would all throw a fit and was like, oh no, how come he gets to do that, we didn't get to do that? I was like, hold on, how does him going to take away from what you're going through right now? Or how does it change what you did? So this is what I think she's getting at, is it doesn't take away from what you have. It just is different for that person, and they're being included. And the reason he got an extra time was because his siblings were older and they were staying up, so he needed to spend some time with them instead of be an only child on his own going to bed much earlier. And that's all we're trying to do, is make society be more inclusive. And so I know that's like an 8th grade explanation, but hopefully that made sense to somebody out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks
So,
for translating
Azra,
for me, Azra.
Yeah. And Azra, I just want to build on that and bring in James Baldwin for a moment, who reminds us, and this is also to Judy talking about how can we be more expansive. James Baldwin says that not everything that we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed that that we don't face. In other words, for us, one of the biggest challenges, and this goes to, I think, a fundamental action step that has everything to do with justice. How can we face somebody and listen to them and learn about what their lives are like, which is the point of this panel, what we're doing to be able to hear somebody, to realize that their justice is not at the expense of our slice of the pie, that there is enough for all of us, but we have to be willing to put ourselves in the arena and face the other that we may be in fear of, but that's a fundamental challenge that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to
Absolutely.
add that I want to kind of flip the script on the idea that this pie is being split up if we try to include more people, and maybe start with the question, why the pie at all? Why is our default position not that the world can always include more people? There's almost no evidence from a sociological or historical perspective that when people societally, historically have included more populations and sought more egalitarian measures that, you know, people actually suffered from that. And in fact, we find that oftentimes these sort of unjust policies and laws actually created more anxiety, more problems, more tension. And so if you look at almost every immigration policy and just sort of like review the pros and cons of what happened when people sort of made it easy for people to sort of go past through borders and sort of live and build their own lives, you find there's almost always higher economic gains. Not that this should ever come back down to just being about money, but like just the fact that human beings just do better when we choose to live together and cooperate. I think a lot of times our anxiety is being used against us, leverage that, oh, if we were to be more inclusive, then we're being preyed on to be told that, oh yes, these physiological responses that you feel, right, these instinctual responses of fear and anxiety, that resources are limited and I need to hold on as tightly as I can to what I have. These are very evolutionarily instinctual responses, and I think that being millennial, I'm all about mindfulness, meditation, and stuff, and to just sort of sit there and observe our own emotions and, you know, embrace that and let it pass through and say, okay, I've passed through my own panic, and now I can sort of calmly see this and try to approach this in a more objective and reasonable manner. I think just my final closing thought there is, to everyone who's watching or trying to consider confronting their own internal racism, just embrace the discomfort that comes with this radical proposal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Qaed.
That's very true. Very true.
Hey, we're coming down to just the last few minutes. It's hard to believe. But we have one more question that we wanted to propose to you all based on a meme or a mantra, if you will, of the great Dr. Cornel West, who says, justice is what love looks like in public. How have you seen justice being lived out in public? Maybe we could start with Carlos and go to Cliff and then Qaed. What does it look like in your experience?
That's a pretty big question. And I think what I would say is that when you see the protests that have happened throughout the country, from Phoenix to Washington, D.C., to Seattle, to Chicago, it is a multitude of people of all backgrounds, of diverse backgrounds, coming together for and asking for justice. No, they're demanding justice, which is the right thing. But it's not what others may have you believe, that it's only the African American community or only the Latino community. It's all types of people, white, red, brown, all of it, all the colors. And that is very heartening, because it says to me that there is recognition by people of diverse backgrounds that know that there is a need for justice reform.
Thanks, Carlos. Cliff?
Yeah, despite the media images that we see of the violence that occurs with our young and old and people of different racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds that are in the streets and that are protesting and demanding rights, not just for themselves, but for other individuals as well. I'm seeing that come to light. And, I'm cautiously optimistic that change will come. Now, when we talk about love, again, we have to shift our paradigm in what does love look like? What does it sound like? And so when I see these folks out in the streets, that is an expression of love. That's an expression of that I care for you, that I'm going to do what I can for you, that I'm going to make sure and do all that I can that your interests are brought to the attention of those who wield the power. Um, I had a conversation with some educators, and I said, we have these young folks called Generation Z. At one time, they were the most diverse population the United States has ever seen. This particular population knows somebody who has a religion or has no religion. They know someone who has a different sexual orientation. They know someone who is of a different race, of a different nationality, and it's okay. And then, followed by Generation Z, we have the Alpha generation. The oldest one right now is about 8 or 9 years old, and they are more diverse and more open to diversity than the Generation Z. And so, as Cornel West said, justice is the love that we see. And so I have to, as an old guy, I have to make a paradigm shift in what does love look like. And I'm seeing that happening with the protests and with individuals who are not necessarily protesting, but they're doing a lot behind the scenes to affect change.
Great, thanks.
Qaed?
I think I find it very heartening that compared to how this was dealt with 10 years ago, the national response has now seen public libraries come out and offer this list of books of how to counter your own internal racism. We've seen social media just kind of explode with everyone coming out and all these positive messages and these messages for change and empowerment. And even companies, which I generally don't really care a lot for corporate activism, but you see companies change their icons to different colors, send out emails to all their customers and stuff. And this sort of mass mobilization is saying that we don't want to stand for inequality. We seek a sort of a better world, as much as some of it's lip service from some people. I think that just this difference in how we respond to this, instead of this sort of quiet shushing, sweep it under the rug kind of response that we've seen some 10 years ago or more, is very heartening. And I think is hopefully going to help us pave, the way forward.
So can I just add a little twist to this, this idea of love? And I think that Dr. King teaches us that love is also manifest in great courage. And yes, we do, Carlos, as you beautifully brought the quote at the beginning, respect is peace. Love is manifest in non-violent protest. And that perhaps that form of love takes the greatest courage for us. And I just invite us to put that in the mix as well as we think about love and how love and justice in the public square manifests itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had a comment come in just a minute ago. Fred Bush lifted up that he was reminded of the children's book Stone Soup that kind of is illustrative of what Qaed was talking about and others about how, when you see demonstrated generosity and an openness to sharing with one another, that the end result is often way more than anyone could do on their own. Any other recommendations that you all might have of stories from your childhood or your experience or your tradition that would resonate along the same lines?
I was reflecting on Azra's earlier comment about even if you're helping one person, you're making a difference. And I'm reminded of the Talmud that to save one life is to save the world entire. It is those small acts of kindness and caring that really can bring community together if we're only willing to take that risk. And that's what I hear, is that for people to either march or to hold up a sign, they feel that that's a risk. But the bigger risk really is not doing anything at all.
Since we're coming to the end of our hour, I would like to ask our guests, and actually even our hosts if we want, but our guests, if there's anything that we didn't cover today and in this last hour that you would like to finish up with, leave us with tools, tips, anything that you can encourage our audience members who really would like to know, and also maybe recommendations, movies, podcasts, books, articles, anything. So we can start wherever you want. Who would like to go first? I don't mind. Cliff.
I'll start. Well,
Gonna put you on the spot.
Azra, I just wanted to remind you that I had sent you a list of resources. And so perhaps
Yes.
those who are tuning in can contact you, and then perhaps you can send those resources to them.
We will be happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to close out here. Rabbi, thank you for bringing up Dr. King. And being a member of the Dr. King Celebration Committee, we oftentimes would have conversations about, what is happening today and what would Dr. King say if he were alive. And I saw this today. I was doing some reading, and Dr. King would probably say, you know what? There's no justice, no peace, means that there is no positive and lasting peace without justice. And so once again, what does justice, what does peace look like? And sometimes it's not how we have been brought up to think of justice and peace.
Thank you. Qaed, Carlos, anyone?
I want to talk about progress in small steps. When I first ran for office in the late 80s, if you wanted to vote, you had to have a reason you wanted to vote by absentee ballot. And on top of that, you also had to have your signature notarized. So there was, it was a mild barrier to voting. And now we have early ballots that come to your home automatically if that's what you request. And it took several years for that to happen. And sometimes our own impatience gets the better of us, but we have to remember that those small steps will lead to a better progress for all of our communities.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, to follow up with Carlos, when we talk about small steps, it's also beyond what we can do politically, right? I think oftentimes when we're trying to make these changes, we're thinking about everything from protests to voting to writing letters to calling our local officials. And these are, of course, necessary steps. But also think about all the different things you do in your daily life, in your own social circles, your social media page, going to school, and what you see there and speaking up. I think these are things that often take great courage to be able to speak up against things we see, or to ask about the sort of policies that are happening at the school we send our children to. And even though it takes a lot of emotional energy to confront these things, I think that's where we also have almost the most leverage in our lives to make those significant changes, those places closest to us. In terms of media and things to suggest, I need to actually, I think, curate this more properly and send it over so that you guys also have that, and then it can be presented instead of trying to remember off the top of my head. But just in general, I would say that we are all living in and it's so much better than it was a while ago, but surrounded by media that sort of reinforce narratives that continue to build the same old narratives about white supremacy and colonial legacies. And I think that the more we look to independent filmmakers and writers and people who are people of color who are writing and shows that are independently created, the more you can really sort of just expose and immerse yourself into the alternative narratives that I think helps a lot with this idea of unlearning our racism. And so sort of creating this diet of independent journalism, media, books, movies, films, really helps shift your attitudes in one of the most organic and emotional ways, I think.
And
Thank
Azra,
you.
I'd like to suggest
So
I'll also get this to you, Azra, so that it can be distributed or put on your website. One of the people that I've learned a lot from and greatly respect is the Reverend Dr. James Forbes, who is the former minister at Riverside Church in New York City. And a number of years ago, he put out the prophetic justice principles, which are like the 10 commandments of what to do to seek justice. They include things like seek the common good and be truthful in facts and motives, to protect the vulnerable, to care for the poor. It's a lot of the things we hear over and over again, but it's put into a very compact and clear list that I think might be helpful to some people to have.
thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna try and give you guys a couple of things. One is I know a lot of people keep saying this to me, that it's difficult. It's difficult when you reach out to people, especially to complete strangers. You want to help. You don't always have the right words. You don't always have the right actions. You don't always have the right look, whatever it is. Um, and sometimes they are going through something on their side that they don't always accept your help, and they don't see your help for what it is. All I ask is don't feel rejected. Yes, the first time you try, it might not work out. They may push you away. Wait a little bit, try again another time, and try again. Try again with 20 more people. But just keep trying again, because that's where your sincerity is going to show. That's where you can see for yourself that you actually meant it from the first time until the last time, and that you kept trying. That's one thing. At ISBA, what we're going to do is create a page for these resources, and I'll give the URL right now, but my webmaster is going to scream because he doesn't even know he's going to do this for us. Um, it's going to be www.isb-az.org/conversations. Okay, so when we go to that, you'll have all of the resources that our wonderful guests and our hosts are sharing with us, and we'll make sure that we put them up there for you, and they should be ready to go. I'm going to tell you they should be ready to go. They're probably not going to be ready to go until this weekend. So please give us a couple of days and at least a few minutes for me to actually get a hold of him to let him know what I've just told you. And lastly, at least from me, before John and everyone wraps up, ISBA, an ISBA conversation, real change begins with you, is not a one-time deal. This is not something we're going to do now, close up shop and finish up. We have planned, John, myself, and David, to bring this back to you at least every 6 to 8 weeks with different conversations, different guests in and around how we can be that change. And we're going to bring our guests, just like our wonderful guests who joined us. Thank you, Qaed. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Carlos. This was absolutely enlightening for me and a joy. Thank you. And I'll leave it up to David and John to close up for me.
Yeah. I just want to amplify that. First of all, again, Azra, you are modeling by bringing these conversations together what action can look like, action that leads to justice in our community. And for Cliff and Qaed and Carlos, just such a treat to be in this together with you, to learn from you, and to walk forward together with all of you.
Thanks, John and Azra, and all of our guests for tonight. As we went through the conversation, something kept coming to mind to me that I'd like to share in closing. Some of you are probably familiar with it, but those are the words of Bobby Kennedy in South Africa back in 1966, when he was invited by a student group to come and speak at the height of apartheid in South Africa. And just one of the things he said in the speech resonates with me over and over again. And he said, each time a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. And that just is an encouragement to me that the tiniest effort, even by each one of us, to stand up for an ideal, to act to improve the lives of others, really does strike a blow against injustice. I want to encourage everybody to do their very best to do their very best.
Thank you. Thank
Great.
you all. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Be safe.
You as well.